Hello and welcome back to the podcast You're Better Than That, hosted by me, Hannah Miller, and joined by my dear friend Zoe Ross-Waddell.
Hello.
Hello, good to see you. I am wearing my Winging It jumper today in honour of today's topic.
What is today's
Okay,
topic?
well, let me tell you this quote.
Okay.
As Oliver Burkeman, our favourite friend at the moment, said, the truth deep down is that we all feel as though we're just winging it. And the winging it phenomenon often comes from something that lots and lots of people experience, which is imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, as it was originally, and perhaps should be called. It's not a syndrome, so perhaps we shouldn't be calling it one. We're going to talk about feelings of imposter today. I've been doing quite a bit of work on this lately. Quite a few organisations have been asking me to talk about it. I was involved in a whole programme with high-performing GPs who all self-selected to be part of this programme because they were suffering from imposter phenomenon. And so we've decided as an organisation at Sidekick, we're going to do a workshop on this coming up. If you're listening in date order, it's 24th of May, 2024. We'll tell you more about that later. But we thought we could do a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through the topic today to whet your appetite. So maybe you want to know more. Do you ever feel like an imposter, Zoe? And if so...
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me a time when you felt it recently.
Oh, I songwrite, and I went into a songwriting session recently with two people who songwrite for a living and have written songs for some well-known people.
Yeah.
And I felt like a major imposter. I was kind of like, what am I doing here? I don't even know anything compared to these people. I felt really embarrassed almost. Like, how have I been allowed in this space?
Somebody's going to find out, and that big pointing finger from the sky is going to come and go, get out.
And also a feeling that, and they were lovely, but a feeling that what if they go away from this and think, why was she here? Like, she didn't know what she needed to. And that's a recent example of when I've felt imposter syndrome. Also, doing this podcast, I feel like an imposter.
Same.
Still today. We're imposters together.
Imposters together. The good news is we're in good company because so many people experience imposter phenomenon. It used to be seen as something that perhaps was mainly or dominated by women, and that's possibly true to a level. I think the number of women that would agree with the statement that they have experienced a sense of feeling like an imposter is at about 70 to 80%. But it's not exclusively women, and I think that is really important. We just might use slightly different language. I've coached several men who are very senior in their roles who've said to me, literally, I sometimes sit there thinking, I am just waiting for the sword to drop on my head. And this is like MDs, who have a track record, but they still feel like they may not live up, or they may be found out. The key thing about what imposter syndrome is that whatever you do, it's not just about doing something for the first time, but it's also about this idea of whatever you do, you struggle to intrinsically or internalize your accomplishments and feel like everything that you ever do isn't enough or has happened because of other forces, like you were lucky, you were in the right place at the right time. And you don't internalize any of those achievements or accomplishments. And so you feel like you don't measure up and you don't have enough. I mean, Meryl Streep, who is an Oscar-winning actress, said, you ask yourself, why are you even making films? Nobody even wants to see you in one. And who do you even think you are? You can't act anyway. That's a very good example because she has the accomplishments that are stacked up and she still says to herself, why am I even here? Nobody wants to watch me anyway. And you can't even act.
Do you have an example of or a story of when you've majorly felt like an imposter?
Yes, loads of them. And there are, by the way, loads of factors that play into this. That when I did the work with the GPs, we uncovered some additional things that can add to the feeling of imposter. It's this idea of belonging and background as well. The very first time I did my CEO groups. So one of the things I do at Sidekick is I go and speak to groups of business owners, and there's normally 10 to 15 of them in a room. It's normally men. It can be a mix, but it's often, majority men. And I go and give a workshop and a talk on leading from a place of strength using your emotional intelligence. The very first time I did that, obviously I was nervous because it was new, but I also remember a really distinct feeling. I got in the lift. It was a swanky London venue, and I got in the lift with my little carry-on bag, and the lift closed behind me, and I felt this overwhelming, who on earth do you think you are? And I just thought, I have got about 20 seconds to sort myself out. Because I'm going to walk out the other side and they'll be right there. But inside, I just thought, who do you think you are? And there are lucky individuals out there that don't really feel like that. And they have a natural self-assurance and confidence in who they are, that they internally back themselves. But they are the minority. They are the minority. There was a situation recently, again, I might have said this story, I can't remember on the podcast, I repeat myself. But there was a woman I heard speaking who was a principal of a college, and somebody asked her about imposter syndrome, and she essentially said she'd never felt it. And I really felt for the person who asked the question, because I understand why she said she'd never felt it, because that was true for her. But she is the unusual one to say she'd never felt like that. She'd always backed herself. Her inner compass was strong. Actually, the vast majority of us don't have that. And therefore, we find ourselves in situations where we don't back ourselves and we don't internalize our accomplishments. There is nothing wrong with recognizing that there are lots of factors in your success. Like the fact that your parents encouraged you at school, it can be a factor. The fact that you were born in a country where you had opportunity could be a factor. The fact that the reason I got one of my gigs is because somebody I know put me forward for it. All of those things are factors, but I've still got to be able to do it. I've still got to be able to do my hard work. And the problem with when you feel like an imposter is that you just cannot see that you deserve any achievements that you've got. So the problem is, if you're listening to this, the problem is it doesn't matter how hard you work and it doesn't matter how good you get. If it's imposter phenomenon, rather than just beginner feelings, you aren't going to necessarily take away the feeling.
So then how do we learn to show up? If you're saying the feeling will always be there, how can we make sure that we're still showing up fully us, bringing our best?
Yeah. Well, I'd first of all say you need to come to my workshop, because we're going to talk more about the practical points then. But I think you've got to do a bit of diagnosis as to what particularly causes it. There are 5 types. We can talk about those in a bit. I think we also need to put some plans in place that help us know how to manage it. And I think one of the things I recognise from the reading and the learning I've done around this is that sometimes we need to recognise the imposter syndrome is not us. So just because our brain thinks something, it doesn't make it true. And it doesn't mean it's us. There's almost like there's an imposter voice inside of each of us saying, what do you think you're doing? Who do you think you are? Nobody wants to listen to you anyway. And then there is also another voice inside of you, which is the real you, which is cheering you on and wants the best for you. And we have to learn to find and listen to that voice a little bit more. Nobody with imposter syndrome is at risk of becoming completely arrogant and lacking of humility. So these people need to understand a little bit more about what they actually bring. I think, I'm a strengths coach. That means I help people know and understand their purpose through their personality and understanding who they are. So I think the more you understand your personality, the more you can see that you do things that uniquely nobody else does. And that's another way of understanding imposter syndrome. So I think there is a need to understand that this is par for the course. It also comes with stretch. We probably won't feel like we can do things when we're being stretched. But I also think we need to understand our personal triggers and make a plan. Really interestingly, just a couple of other bits of data I've got here in front of me before we get into the types. 2/3 of Britons say they have difficulty accepting compliments and praise. And that is a classic imposter syndrome thing to do, to say, you did a great job, and go, oh, it wasn't me, it was, I had great people around me, or, oh, that thing, it was nothing, to bat it back. There's a small number of people who go, yes, thanks, I was great, wasn't I? We're not talking about those people, but most of us will bat off a compliment and not internalize it. And I think the best thing we can do in that simple situation is to just say, thank you, that means a lot. Take it on board, hear the compliment. Don't second guess the compliment. Don't think about why they've given it to you, and just say, thank you, I really appreciate that feedback. It really means a lot. That's something I've really learnt to do. When I get nice emails, when I get feedback on the podcast or on my work, I just say, really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. You have no idea how much it means. And I just leave it at that. I don't justify. I don't say, oh, there's lots of other people who are great. And I don't do any of that. I just say, I really appreciate. So that's a really simple thing people can do. I also think the expectations we have of ourselves are higher than they are of anybody else. And 6 in 10 Britons say they have high expectations of themselves. Nothing wrong with a high expectation, but it does also mean you probably most of the time aren't going to meet it. And that's the challenge. So imposter syndrome is essentially this concept of, I don't have everything I need. I never will have. Somebody's going to find me out. The reason I'm here is because of other things and not because of myself. And there are other triggers such as our cultural background, our class background that can add to this feeling of I don't belong here. And one of these days somebody's going to find out. In those moments, that's when we've got to show some kindness to ourselves. And actually, a really great question is, do you have any evidence for what you're feeling? Like when you were saying about those songwriters, did you have any evidence at all that they were thinking they were wasting their time? No. And can you be less experienced at something but still bring an important lens to...
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And I also am thinking, if I was on the flip side of that and someone maybe less experienced came to work with me, or in your case, like work with you, I would never be thinking, why on earth have they come?
Absolutely.
Like, I would just not have those thoughts. But why is it that we think that other people have those thoughts?
Absolutely.
When we wouldn't do that to
we wouldn't do that
else.
to anybody else.
Yeah.
I know. The way we treat ourselves in any situation, for most of us, is very different to how we'd see anybody else. And the imposter syndrome thing essentially is just these excessively high goals and high standards and expectations that just leave you feeling wanting. And the problem is, what you're looking for to validate you is never going to come. And so it's a problem that will not go away until you can see it for what it is, like an emperor in new clothes, and say, this is a false goal. This is a waste of my time and energy. In one sense, nobody has a right to be here and nobody has it all. I'm going to take the opportunity I've been given and I will show up with my full self. That is something that is in our control, and model getting it right, getting it wrong, and everything in between. Now, the people who originally kind of came up with this phenomenon said there were 5 types and 5 ways it shows up. And I will talk about this in more detail in the workshop, but I thought we could have a whistle stop through the 5 types so people can have a think about that, and we can think about that. And at the end, you can tell me which one you think you resonate with the most, and I'll tell you as well. There's definitely more than one that you will resonate with, but there's probably one that you think if push comes to shove, this is the one for me. Okay? So shall I go through them? Yeah. Right, so the first one they named the perfectionist. Okay, so simply put, perfectionists have excessively high standards for themselves. When they don't reach a goal, they feel that it's all about them. Their self-doubt is high when they don't achieve what they expected to do. They also feel that if they want something to be done right, then they probably have to do it themselves. The idea that actually delegating to somebody else probably means it won't reach the expectations that it should. They often don't feel a sense of satisfaction even when they do what they wanted to, because they always think about what could have been better. So they will say, oh, that was great, but I could have done this. So there's this sort of insatiable drive to being able to do things more perfectly, more accurately, being 100% flawless. We won't go till we're sure. We will make sure that all our ducks are in a row and we're brilliant at what we do. Likely to be planned. They like to get things, high standards and high marks for themselves. And here's a couple of questions that you could ask yourself to wonder if this applies to you, all right? Not just you, Zoe, any listener. Have you ever been accused of being a micromanager? Do you have great difficulty in delegating? Even when you are able to delegate to someone, do you feel frustrated and disappointed in the results? When you miss the insanely high mark that you have set for yourself on something, would you accuse yourself of not being cut out for your job and ruminate on it for days? Do you feel like your work must be 100% perfect 100% of the time? So that's the first type, perfectionists. What do you think about that off the bat?
That is really interesting, actually, how, because you can think as a perfectionist, because often they're good at getting things right and doing things perfectly, that wouldn't then result in someone feeling like an imposter.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of reflection to do there.
Because the thing is, even when you are a perfectionist and you've worked really hard on it, the reality is some things won't meet your mark, and they'll often see the thing that they haven't done or could have done a bit better.
That's true.
And even if somebody else has done something well, they can be quite a hard taskmaster as well, because it's just not quite good enough.
And perfect doesn't exist.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't. Even the most brilliant people can't do perfect things. So the next one is the super person, the superwoman, the superman, the super person. And this person is convinced they're a phony in relation to their real deal colleagues, and they just work harder. So for them, it's the amount, getting lots of stuff done, doing more than one thing, being able to juggle and work hard, overload themselves with more and more work. It's actually a little bit of workaholic behaviour. They're validated by the fact that they can achieve a lot, they get a lot of stuff done, they juggle a lot, they tick loads of things off, they can have all these tabs open and be pushing all of these things forward all at the same time. Yeah, super women, super men have this, capacity thing around, I've done all of this stuff and I'm doing it all really quite well. And if I can do that, then I'm not an imposter. The problem is, this is interesting. Again, they're getting their validation from work itself. So the validation is not necessarily in that comes from working, it's the actual doing of work itself. And they might find that constructive criticism, they are more inclined to take a bit more personally. I mean, I would say all of these people are. It's again about trying to find that internal validation and not just about, look at all the things I'm doing. That makes me okay to be here. So the questions to consider here, if you wonder if this one might apply to you: do you stay later at the office than the rest of your team, even past the point that you've completed the day's necessary tasks? Do you get stressed when you're not working and find downtime completely wasteful? Have you left your hobbies and passions and let them fall by the wayside, sacrificed to work? Do you feel like you haven't truly earned your title, even if you've got numerous degrees and numerous accomplishments and achievements, so you pressed to work harder and longer to prove your worth?
That makes me think about, I wonder what the underlying emotion is there and what the lack is. And it's showing up as work harder in order to prove who I am and prove myself. But what's the underlying thing?
Yes. And also, where did that message first come from? The first one is, unless it's perfect, you don't measure up. And this is, unless you're doing lots of things, you aren't contributing enough. I mean, I very much felt growing up that one of the messages I heard in my home was, don't waste time. It wasn't necessarily intended, but there was this sort of, you mustn't waste time, you mustn't waste opportunity. And so that can act as a bit of a driver, where there were some perfectionist tendencies actually also in my family of origin, but I'm not a perfectionist. Like I've said that lots of times, and I don't think I am. I think I've almost rebelled against that a little bit, because I think you either become the thing that you see. I mean, my dad, if he's listening, you won't mind me saying, my dad is quite perfectionist. He writes on a ruler.
Wow.
Yeah, that gives you a little bit of an idea of the man. He writes on a ruler. He will do a job really diligently and carefully. I don't do that, I don't think. So yeah, that's interesting how these in your home, even in really like, positive homes, you hear messages around values and around drivers. And I definitely feel don't waste time, don't waste opportunity was something that I have really internalized as a bit of a value or a driver that is both good and not so good, I think.
Sure.
The third one is the natural genius. Now, this is also quite interesting because these people, again, they see their worth because they have a natural expertise and genius around it. For them, it is about ease and speed. So it's not just about knowing the stuff, it's how easy it came to you. So probably this person did pretty well early on in their life. So as a child, they did find things quite easy. A lot of things came easy to them. And so they internalize this idea of, oh, I'm good because I've done something quickly and easily. And they're known for that. They will have been called clever, they would have had all of those kind of labels given to them. But therefore, that means that if they find something harder, if it's not coming easy to them, they just feel a sense of shame. If they can't do something as a natural genius, they have no frame of reference for that. And obviously, that comes to everybody, unless you are an out-and-out actual genius. We're all going to experience that. And unfortunately, some people experience that too late in their life. On a side note, when I was a teacher, this is something I felt really passionately about. And it probably comes from my own story as well a little bit. I missed a year of school when I was little because my teacher, when I was in year 2, I think I was in year 2, or was I in year 3? I can't remember. I went from year 3 to year 5. I missed year 4. And that was because my teacher felt that I was academically capable. And so I saw education psychologists for quite a few weeks. They'd come and test me. And a decision was made by Worcestershire County Council that I could go to year 5 from year 3. And my parents had quite a big decision there. And, on balance, I think they made the right one. But it did come with things. It came with I feel it's one of the big contributors to my own imposter syndrome, to be honest, that I never really belonged there and I knew it. And so I had to show and demonstrate. All the teachers knew, everybody knew. And so I think I've only recently realised this in the last year, that I think it contributed to this. You have to prove that you're meant to be here because you actually shouldn't be. And I knew I was there because I was, at that point, clever. I mean, it evened it out, unfortunately, as I got older. But so therefore, my point was that when I became a teacher, when I saw a child that was finding things easy and they were doing them speedily and they'd come to the desk, especially little girls who are really driven by this, and I'd tick it all, and let's say they got 20 out of 20, I used to say, great job, and then I'd say, I'm sorry I wasted your time. And that's not what they wanted to hear. And that was because I wanted them to understand that it was important that they didn't find everything easy. And that if they thought that's what good looked like, was that it was quick and easy and I got everything right, whether that was perfectionism or natural genius, I wanted them to know that that was on me and that they needed to be given more difficult stuff to do. And that the goal was never to give me a straight A thing. And it was something I really worked hard on. And I've got friends with little girls who I can see some tendencies sometimes of this. I must do everything perfectly, or I must, show that it's easy for me. And I want them to experience that as young as possible so it doesn't all come crashing down A-levels, uni, or at some point, like some of these GPs I work with who failed their first year medical exams, who've never failed anything in their life. So natural genius is another one of these imposter syndrome things that everyone will experience this sudden feeling of now I can't do it, and up until now I have been able to do it, which is why highly capable people have this experience sometime in their 20s, maybe for the first time, and then they just don't know what to do with it because they've never experienced it in our school system. So a couple of questions you could ask yourself is, are you used to excelling without effort? Do you have a track record of getting straight A's or the gold stars? Were you told that you were the smart one in a family group? When you're faced with a setback, does your confidence tumble, and do you avoid challenges because it's uncomfortable to try something you're not good at? So 2 more, real quick. Number 4 is the soloist, and essentially this kind of imposter, which from the data sounds like the most common in the UK, is all about, I've got to be able to do this myself. Should be able to do it without asking for help. As somebody I love very much, who I think is a bit like this, I'm not going to say who it is because it's not fair on her, but somebody that I know well, that it's very much this idea of I can do it on my own. We joke about it together, I'm like, let me help you. But soloists, I think, feel that I've got to be able to do this myself. I don't need anyone's help. And if I have needed help, it means that I'm not good enough. It means that I haven't got what it takes. If I have to lean into somebody, if somebody has to give me a helping hand, I am not adequate, and I don't have what it takes. If you're listening and you feel like this, ask for the help. There are people who are willing to give you a hand. You would be surprised how much people are willing to give you some help, and to just put it out there and say, I can't quite get this done. Could you give me a hand? There is nothing wrong with that. So again, the questions might be, do you feel that you need to accomplish things on your own? Do you frame requests in terms of the requirements of the project rather than your needs as a person? Or do you feel like I don't need anyone's help is a phrase that you might internally say, even if you never say it out loud? No, I'm fine. I can do it. So that's the fourth one. And the last one is the expert, which is similar to natural genius, but it's different. Natural genius is about this speed and ease. It's always come easy to me. Expert is more about, I need to make sure I know enough. So my husband Sam is a bit of an expert in the sense that he's a learner. So he's one of his top Clifton strengths is learner. And so when he's asked to do something, he really wants to be sure he understands it. So it's not that he thinks he's a natural genius. It's that if I'm going to speak on something or do something, I really should know what I'm talking about. The thing is with experts is that they often know more than others anyway because of their natural curiosity, and yet they are well aware of everything they don't know. So I will often say to Sam, you know so much more about this than everyone who's listening. You're just aware of all the books you've not read, all the podcasts you've not listened to. But actually there's a wealth that's already there because you're a learner. So learners can never satisfy this because they just feel overwhelmed with the amount of learning there is to do. You read a book and you think, gosh, there's 10 more books on this topic. I know nothing. But at least you read a book where somebody else didn't read anything or do anything. So experts feel this sense of, I should know what I'm talking about. I need to be well prepared and be a considerable amount ahead of my audience. And I guess I don't suffer from this. I would say everybody has expertise to bring because we all have our own experiences. We all have the things that we've read and collected. So everyone is an expert to some level or another. It doesn't mean we are experts in our field, but you can know enough. You can know enough to go. As long as you've got something to share and something to bring, that is your contribution. Nobody can cover off whoever you are. Even if you're Stephen Hawking, you don't know everything about anything. Nobody does except for God. So these ones would be, would you shy away from applying for a job unless you met every single educational requirement? Do you keep feeling like you need more training or certifications in order to think that you've got what it needs? There are some doctors that literally collect letters after their names. Even if you've been in your role for some time, you think you just don't know enough? Or would you shudder if someone said you're such an expert in this field? Almost like, oh my gosh, if you only knew how little I knew. And the thing is here, for most people that feel like this, actually really are quite expert. They just can't see how much they know. So those are your 4 types. When we do the workshop, we'll dig into this again, but we'll also look at triggers, behaviour, expectations. We've got the perfectionist, the super person, the natural genius, the soloist, and the expert. Zoe, what do you think's your number one problem?
I think I lean more towards the soloist, but I think I always talk about my competition strength. I think it comes in, if I can't do something by myself, I view that as I've failed. And I think that's where I struggle.
Interesting.
What about you?
The super person.
Sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me there, though, is that, again, thinking about strengths, I don't have that many executing strengths. So it doesn't come from I'm just an like Laura's got loads more executing strengths than me, achiever and restorative and all of those things. I haven't got those. But there is this thing about urgency that I live in, which is and get it done, doing more, make it happen, which I feel if I can't stay in that space, I'm not, I mean, there's definitely a dabble in the others for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely dabble in them all. I think I've got a little bit of everything in there. Although I often say I'm not a perfectionist, I think there probably are ways I am, and ways that plays out. But the reason, just to kind of close this session, the point of having this conversation and thinking about the types isn't that we then resolve it, but we can diagnose a little bit of the root. If we just live like picking the leaves off the tree and you don't get underneath to what the root is, you can't stop and recognise what is happening in that moment. And the reason I told that story about my childhood is that was a definite factor in the way I saw the way I showed up. And every single one of us will have stories. There was a woman on one of my courses recently, and she was a doctor, but she was Indian, and she wasn't British Indian. She'd been born in India and came to India the UK as an adult. And she said, I feel like an imposter because I have a strong accent, and I think people think I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what I'm talking about. And that honesty unlocked so much in the room that afternoon. But that's part of her story. And her realising that means that she can minimise the power it has over her, because as she started to hear other people in the room say their things, you realise we're all carrying this stuff because of our backgrounds or our situations. I just read a great book by a guy called Gary Stevenson, who became the world's youngest trader in the UK, the UK's youngest trader. And he said his first day at LSE, he turns up in a tracksuit and he knows everyone thinks he's stupid. He was really poor. And he said everyone knew he was poor, and rich people think poor people are stupid. By the way, he didn't have imposter syndrome. He was very, very capable and knew what he was capable of. But he came with a bit of baggage of, So the reason I'm saying all of this is think about your story, think about your experiences and how they have both helped you show up really positively, but also where you might be listening to some messages that are making you listen to that imposter when you are not an imposter, because you are you and only you can be you. How can you be an imposter?
Amazing. Well, we have the Imposter Workshop.
Oh, yes. People need to be listening to this.
The Imposter Workshop is on the 24th of May. And if you are a podcast listener, you get a special gift from us. If you use
we love you.
Code podcast15, you will get your ticket for £15 when really they are supposed to be 20. And if you look in the show notes, there'll be a link that you can click to get your ticket.
Find the link. Obviously, if you're listening to this in 2025, the workshop happened, you missed it. But if you're listening to it in date order, click on the link. You can come along for £15 instead of £20. We'll discuss this in much more detail and give you some more actionable things to think about. We'd love to see you there.